And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Today's sea ice analysis for this Friday showing ice edge not much different from yesterday, and with winds becoming northeast and increasing and then northerly here, especially on late Saturday night and Sunday, ice edge will start to come back down to the south and southwest beginning about that time. And for the forecast for tonight, increasing wind and rain here, Alaska Peninsula, Bristol Bay up to southern Kenai Peninsula. Fair light winds over the interior, all the way down the southeast coast. Areas of light snow up there to the north, and still windy and unsettled for the central Aleutians. For tomorrow, that system pushing precipitation up into the lower Yukon River Valley area, Bristol Bay, southern Kuskokwim Valley, and into western Cook Inlet, southern Kenai Peninsula, Kamishak Bay area. Should be mostly sunny for the southeast coast with a few clouds around. Same thing for the interior here, dry, sunny, and mild. Flurries along the central Arctic coast and rain and snow showers out over the Aleutians. And then for Sunday, a trough along the west coast will produce quite an area of light rain and snow, or snow depending on which side of the trough axis you're on here. Cold northerly winds pull cold air southward again to the eastern Aleutians. This front stalling out right over Kodiak Island, pushing moisture in toward the coast of the Panhandle late in the day with a general increase in the clouds during the late morning through the afternoon. Dry over the eastern interior and an area of light snow for the North Slope and Arctic coast. And down along the south coast tomorrow, northwest winds 10 to 15 knots, central coast, northwest at 15. As you arrive on the north coast up there, they'll be variable at 10 knots. Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay, Stevens Passage, Clarence Strait, all looking at north winds for Saturday at about 10 knots with 2-foot seas. Not much different on Sunday, all 10-knot winds staying light here over the inside waters and quite variable with seas at around 2 feet. And for the south coast, southeast at 15 knots, central coast east at 15 to 20 knots. And a little breezier up there to the north, east winds 20 to 30 knots with seas 10 to 13 feet. Cook Inlet, northeast winds for Saturday 20 to 25 knots, but good gales Kamishak Bay as that system pushes northeastward there, coming up to 40 knots throughout the day with seas building to 10 feet. Barren Islands, east 35 knots. And east winds at 25 knots for the western North Gulf Coast, east 15 for the eastern coast there, and light variable winds for Prince William Sound. And then for Sunday, the North Gulf Coast, it's going to be a little brisk out there on Sunday with east winds at 30 to 35 knots, east winds 20 knots for Prince William Sound. Gale warnings for the Barren Islands, east 35 and east 30 for Kamishak Bay, Cook Inlet, north to northeast winds 20 to 25 knots. And for Bristol Bay for tomorrow, east winds 40 knots, the Alaska Peninsula, east to southeast winds 15 to 30 knots. Kodiak Island, east-southeast winds, 30 to 40 knots. And for Sunday, Kodiak Island, lighter winds, east and southeast at 15 to 25 knots, strongest there in Shelikof Strait. Alaska Peninsula, south to southwest winds, 15 to 20 knots, southeast at 20 for Bristol Bay. And for the eastern Aleutians, north winds 15 to 20 knots tomorrow, central Aleutians northeast at 25. And the western Aleutians, north to northeast winds, 25 knots. For the next day, Sunday, north to northwest winds, 20 to 25 knots here, west of Adak, all the way out to Shemya. And for the central Aleutians here, northwest or west-northwest winds, 20 to 25 knots. On Alaska Island, west winds, 25 knots, seas 9 to 12 feet. And gale warnings for St. Lawrence Island, Yukon Delta coast, and St. Matthew Island, as well as St. Paul and St. George, all out of the northeast tomorrow at 35 knots. Kuskokwim Delta coast, a little lighter at 30 knots. And then for Sunday, brisk wind advisories, Norton Sound, east at 25. Otherwise, St. Lawrence Island, east winds 20 knots, east at 20 here for the Kuskokwim Delta coast, 15 knots for the Yukon Delta coast. And St. Paul, St. George to St. Matthew Island, north winds 30 to 35 knots, seas 10 to 11 feet. Brisk wind advisories, central eastern Beaufort Sea coast tomorrow. West-southwest, 25 knots up there. The western Arctic coast west at 20. And the Chukchi Sea, variable winds at 10 to 15 knots. Then a big increase in those winds for the Chukchi Sea on Sunday here, north to northeast, 30 to 40 knots. Northeast at 30 knots for the western Arctic coast. Central coast, northeast at about 15. And the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, looking at east-northeasterlies, around 20 knots.